So greetings to anyone that's reading this in the future. My name is Caroline McLean. I oversee the International Students and Scholars Division at the University of Montana. And it is my honor to introduce Chris Hyslop, who is the Executive Director of Montana World Affairs Council. Chris is joining us as part of International Education Week, which is a national initiative of the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Education that celebrates the benefits of education and exchange worldwide. UM has been celebrating International Education Week since its inception 20 years ago under the auspices of the Global Engagement Office. So with that, welcome, and Chris, I'll let you get started.
Carolyn, thank you so much. And I want to give special thanks to University of Montana, who's invited me here today. They've been a great partner, the University of Montana, and the University of Montana system writ large for us. So we really appreciate the opportunity to talk to anybody and everybody who's interested in international education. I had the opportunity last year, it was great, and again this year. So hopefully if I do a good job, I'll get invited back next year. So let me just start by introducing myself very briefly. As Carolyn said, I'm the Executive Director of the Montana World Affairs Council. I spent the last 20 years living and working overseas, primarily working with the United Nations. So my experience in international education is a little bit more on the international side than on the education side. But I was very fortunate when I moved to Missoula to find the Montana World Affairs Council. And through a series of good fortune, I managed to get a job here, and I've been very pleased ever since. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I've got a short presentation that I'm going to share with you to help participants and viewers understand a little bit better about who we are and what we do, but then moving into the topic of the day, which is online and hybrid provision of education. And so if you're interested in those kinds of things, you're definitely watching the right clip because that's what we do. And that's what we're doing more of and learning more of every day. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to kick off here a little bit of a presentation for everybody. So as I say here, it says, Global Ed goes hybrid. And for most, that hybrid means that it is one event for which you have both in-person and online, which is what we do. But we have a broader notion of hybrid. We look at that across our programs and just say, we have some programs that are fully in-person. We have some programs that are fully online, and we have others that use the traditional term hybrid, where they're online and in person at the same time. But we kind of use it for everything. So I'm going to describe a little bit more about our programs and how we approach them. One second. There we go. So let's just start briefly so everybody knows who we are. Many people may not have heard of the Montana World Affairs Council. This council was started 22 years ago, or almost 22 years ago, by Ambassador Mark Johnson, a native of Great Falls and a career U.S. diplomat who served as ambassador to the United States. When he retired, he wanted to stay engaged in the world. And so he formed the Montana World Affairs Council, which is one of 90 World Affairs Councils across America. Some are state-based, some are city-based. But as you can see right in front of you, it says that's our mission statement there. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to fostering global awareness and understanding in Montana's classrooms and communities. So what we're doing is we are trying to engage community members and students in schools on the dynamics of the international system and what is going on in the world. And not only what is going on, but how does it affect us, and what does it mean, and what can you do from there? And I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. So that's the mission statement. Everybody has one, but then there's also the kind of behind the scenes statement, which is our next one. It's maybe better described as who we want to be, or who do we want to be seen as. So the Montana World Affairs Council wants to be seen as a resource and a partner of choice for understanding global issues and how they affect Montana and Montanans. So If you're interested, let's say, in the relationship between the current inflationary pressures and China trade, you would have done well to come to our lecture last week at the University of Montana, where we spent an hour talking about this. It was online and it was live, so we had a hybrid program there. If you are watching Squid Game on Netflix and want to know what's going on with Korean media and how is that affecting the global media market, you could have tuned into our webcast called What, So What, Now What, a 5-minute webcast that brings you up to speed on the issue of the day. So we want, and then also if you're a teacher or an administrator or a student in school and you want to learn more about the world, you want to know what is going on and how does it affect you, you might join any number of our programs that we have exclusively for students across Montana. And that's what we're trying to be. That's who we want to be, that resource and partner of choice. When people say, you know, I don't really know I don't understand what's going on with this global supply chain glut. Well, in a week from now, I'm going to have Joanna Shelton on the webcast and you can find out. So we want people thinking of us when they want to know more. So the question is, of course, like, why are you doing this and why are you doing it now? Why does this stuff really matter? So we try to break down the current situation a little bit that is facing Montanans, whether you are a student or a citizen. There is really an unprecedented opportunity to understand and, importantly, influence global events. And when I say understand global events, our programs aren't just about what is happening. We're not just reading the headlines off of the newspaper. We go deeper to try to understand, okay, if this thing is happening, if the China trade deal goes through, how does that affect Montana agriculturalists? How does it affect farmers and ranchers? We're trying to get deeper than just the headline. And then beyond that, how then could you influence these events? Like, what are the levers that Montanans can use if you're interested and affected by this stuff? Can you use to make the change that you are looking for? And let's also keep in mind, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche that global issues are impacting us directly and more immediately. You know, we keep saying that we're living in a shrinking world and things are happening faster, and that tends to be a bit of a cliche. But actually, things are, or at least our knowledge of them is happening very fast, and our impact, the impact that they have on us, and the impact that we can have on the situation is also incredibly rapid. And so whereas 100 years ago, something could happen around the world and we might not hear about it for a few days to a few weeks, any of us who has a cell phone in our pockets, which I presume is all of us, can know in frankly less than 1 second from the moment of reportage that something has happened around the world. And so, and then that impact of that happening, if something happens and there is an impact on us, that is also coming at us much faster than it did in the past. Now, Montana is deeply involved in these issues, and Montanans want to shape policy. You know, I've heard people outside of Montana kind of say, well, you know, Montana, it's a rural state, not a lot going on. There's probably not a lot of interest in the world. I've found nothing could be farther from the truth. Actually, Montanans are deeply engaged in the world. They are deeply affected and want to affect what's going on. Not the least of which, of course, is the agricultural economy, deeply tied into the global economy. So the major portion of our state-based economy, being agriculture, is in a global market. And when something happens halfway around the world, even if it's not related to trade or ag policy, it may have an effect. So saber rattling between Taiwan and China, two big trade partners of Montana, can affect our trade. And people want to know about that. So Montanans want to know. We're repeatedly told by citizens, we want to know more, as with teachers, because students in school also want to know more about what's going on. Not just the what, mind you, but, you know, so what? Like, why does this affect us? Montana students are also preparing to enter an unparalleled era of global engagement. So, you know, what what we have seen in the past, say 15 to 20 years, and what we experience now is only the beginning of what is going to become a much more seamless, much dramatically more immediate and unparalleled era where the ability of somebody to engage in the world is going to be much, much better. And the need to engage is also going to increase exponentially. Right now, one can oftentimes sit back and watch things happen, but in the future, and the future being now, that luxury, I don't think we can afford anymore. So that's kind of why we see this so important right now. Quickly on the programs that we offer, and I see that I've made a small mistake. This is not an exhaustive list, but I did want to stay on the topic of the hybrid or the kind of using online and in-person programming to broaden our program reach. So we have a number of programs. Our flagship program is called Academic World Quest, and that brings 300 of the best and brightest Montana students during non-pandemic years to the University of Montana for a 3-day global education conference. Last year, we held it entirely online, like so many did. But typically, the Academic World Quest brings kids from every corner of this state in for several days to engage with ambassadors, authors, journalists, international thought leaders who fly into Missoula to engage with these kids who are from every corner of the state. They're not just city kids. They're not just Western Montana kids. They're from Wolf Point. They're from Glendive. They're from Miles City. They're from all over the place. So we engage high school students that way. We have another program that's called Counsel in the Classroom. This is entirely online. Fortunately, we've been doing online programming for Montana students for almost 8 years now. So before the pandemic, we already had a pretty robust online presence and working with a lot of teachers and a lot of students around the state. This continues with a program that we call GeoQuest, which uses geography as the kind of anchor point and engages middle school students in the world by looking at 4 countries each year and delving into those countries and learning more about them, and then having the kids try to understand a little bit more, how does what is happening in that country affect what happens in Montana and vice versa? What are some similarities? What are some differences? Trying to engage kids not just on what is happening out there, but what is happening in their own backyards. Looking ahead, we're planning a program that we call EconoQuest, which is very similar to GeoQuest. You can see that by the title, but this will be for high school kids to better understand international economic dynamics like international trade. Why are all of those containers stuck in Los Angeles? Well, a big answer to that comes by understanding better the ins and outs of the international trade system. So we're going to be delivering that program to students across Montana starting next fall. And lastly, we have virtual exchange. That's VX Ireland. Our first virtual exchange begins this April, where we'll have Montana students connecting with Irish students in Ireland. Over the course of 3 or 4 weeks, they'll do a program that looks kind of at their cultural diversity of the different places where they live and in their communities, compare and contrast and get to know each other a little bit better. So all of these programs use online aspects. Some of them are both online and in person at the same time. And so in doing so, I think, we're all learning a little bit more about how to do this better. The pandemic has taught us how to do online pretty well, but we're still learning now, okay, now that we are able to do some safe in-person programming, how can we do that yet maintain the door open to those who want to join us online? And so that is something we're doing across all of our programs. So why and how do we do all of these kind of interesting programs? Again, now I'm really going to zero in on the online aspects of our programs. So most of you out there who may be watching this are from Montana, and so our geography. It's a huge state. And so for a student to travel 10 hours from Eastern Montana to Missoula to attend a program is just not reasonable. And so, I mean, very simply put, using online programming exponentially expands our reach and brings in the content that teachers are asking for into their classrooms directly through the internet. Because they frankly out there have limited opportunities. We know that in the public school system writ large, budgetary pressures and other kinds of pressures on teachers and on schools is limiting their ability to deliver international or global education, learning more about the world. We are able to help them by providing all of these programs completely free of charge. So we're trying to deal with that very limited opportunity that many of our schools and many of our communities have. We also now we benefit from statewide internet access. There are very few, if any, places in Montana that don't have a very solid internet connection. Even the smallest schools in the most remote places have benefited from an increased capacity of their internet. So we are now not only hoping that everybody can do it, but now we're pretty sure that for most schools and for most kids and most communities, people can come into the virtual space and take part in our programs. We've partnered with a company here called Inspired Classrooms, who provides a lot of what they call the back end technology. A lot of this stuff isn't simply Zoom like we're doing now. It requires much beefier technology, which they help us with. And so we're very fortunate to have them as a partner. And we use really a lot of other things that are off-the-shelf tools as well, that are within reach of our small budget and that our program participants can use. That's how we're doing it. Now, what kinds of needs are we meeting? I've mentioned this already in bits and pieces, but we know that schools are facing constraints, and it's not just budgetary constraints. There's time constraints, there's subject matter constraints. And what we hear from teachers is we need this kind of support. If we're going to provide any level of global education, it's very difficult for them to do so within their current means, and that's where we step in. We see this really as meeting the need of preparing the next generation of citizens. Now that, of course, is what education does in general, right? But keep in mind what I said earlier about the changing nature of the world, and the world that students are now in and will be joining as adults is not the world of 10, 20 years ago. Preparing for this next generation means that you need to have better and clearer understanding of what's going on in the world, how it impacts you, and the use of technology to help you do just that. So we're trying to then foster this awareness amongst kids and have them think critically about timely global issues, about what is happening right now and how does it affect them. And as I said, this, education and technology go hand in hand. So whereas, a lot of us maybe spent a lot of time in the library researching and so on, of course, that's still there. It's going to be there for the foreseeable future. But much of that has moved, of course, online, and the use of technology is becoming an absolute kind of, sine qua non, the absolute basic kind of skill that a student will need to possess in order to do practically anything. And these are all part of what we call the 21st century skills. That's not just technology, but 21st century skills is a list of 12 skills that educators around the United States have developed in hopes of saying, these are the kinds of things kids are going to need to know. Of course, there are technology skills, but there is skills like, cross-cultural communication, being able to effectively communicate with somebody who is not of your culture. This is becoming more and more common, not just in education, but in the workplace and around the world. We're simply not a kind of homogenous workplace and a homogenous community anymore. We're a global community, and being able to communicate in those terms is key. This, we hope, helps students become better citizens and better learners. And it should, and what we try to do in our programs is, kids are so curious, and we're trying to spark that curiosity, trying to spark their thinking, and, putting things together like, if this thing is happening in Germany today, How might that same thing happen in our community or in our state? If this dynamic is unfolding in Africa right now, is there a similar dynamic, say, in our region or in our county or in our school? This is what we're trying to get kids to look at, to compare these different dynamics and see that, maybe these things are happening also within their communities as well. What are we our outcomes rather for students and for anybody who takes part in our programs? Look, we're trying to develop globally competent students who can examine local, global, and intercultural issues. I've explained why this is so important, but this is what we hope to be the outcome. And in doing so, to understand and appreciate different perspectives and interact successfully and respectfully with others, and then to take responsible action towards sustainability and collective well-being. So what you have there is kind of what we call the what, so what, now what approach. And you heard me mention that, that's the name of one of our webcasts, actually. In other words, we want kids to know what is going on, but we want them to think about so what, meaning how does that impact them? What is the effect of this thing on them as individuals, as a community, as a county, a state, as a nation, and as a part of the world? Why does this matter to you? And how can you understand that? And then finally, that third point, now what is, considering, should you be taking action now that you know what is happening and you know how it affects you? What are your options or your channels for taking action on this issue? So those are the things we're trying to convey when we're doing all of these programs with students. And that looks like to me like I'm kind of wrapping up here at the end of my general presentation, just to give you some idea again of broadly speaking, we're doing a huge range of programs. The point of my talk was to give you some idea of what those programs are, how we do them, and why, but also to give you a little bit more insight into an organization like ours that does a lot of in-person, online, and then hybrid programs. And I didn't really talk so much about that, but I do want to make this one point that I kind of glazed over earlier, which is to say all of us have been on Zoom for a year and a half, and most of us can't stand it anymore. We're experiencing Zoom fatigue, if you will, and okay, that's real. But in the meantime, it is still a great tool for us to use, and many people continue to use it as a means to stay engaged on any number of things, right? When you can't meet people in person, whether that's due to the pandemic or here in Montana, it can be due to simple geography. It's a 14-hour drive and we just can't get to this place. We can do it online. So these tools are, we've all been using for better or for worse over the past year and a half, but now we're entering a new time. And that time is, okay, I think we can start going back to in-person programs. Of course, the schools are back in person. Workplaces are now, broadly speaking, working in person. So how can we now take this idea of being out there and being in person together in different places and add to it the possibility of using basic technology and basic online programming to go past that in-person group? So just to give you some idea of kind of what happens. For example, when we have an expert speaker come and talk to a community group, if we have a really good night, we might have between 60 and 80 people come for that presentation. And that's great. And those are 60 or 80 people who really want to know things. They want to learn about what's going on. But if we take that same idea, we take that same in-person presentation, and then we do a couple of extra things. And this is where the hybrid comes in. Number one is, of course, we can also be webcasting this via Zoom. So like we're doing now, but that's not where it stops. Now also via Zoom, you can live cast on Facebook simultaneously. So you have somebody talking in person, It's also on Zoom. At the same time, the same stream is on our Facebook page, right? And so now I have 3 places where people are engaging in this. Now, just like this program, many of you may be watching this as a, watching it post facto as a recording on YouTube or in an archive. And of course, all of our programs then, anytime that they are online, are also archived and placed on YouTube. So we get another channel of people who are then watching this event and learning about this dynamic post facto, and they can watch it anytime. It's there in perpetuity. It doesn't stop there, though. We often then will, and Zoom, it makes it very easy. For every Zoom recording, there's an audio track and a video track. And we just take the audio track and we podcast it. So people who love to podcast, you're out there, doing your jogging, you're out there raking the leaves or, blowing the snow, whatever you're doing out there, you got your podcast on. Hey, you want to do 5 minutes learning about the tensions between China and Taiwan, which was one of our webcasts last month. Yeah, plug it in, listen to it. And then all of those things for a small nonprofit like us, another great benefit of this hybrid approach where we're offering all of these multiple channels is each one of the channels delivers a metric, meaning it will tell you how many people have watched this. So YouTube and Facebook and Zoom and any podcasting platform will tell you, every day it updates automatically. How many people have you reached? And so for those of you who are listening, and if you're a nonprofit or if you're any kind of organization or otherwise, whereby this is important to you, that you need to know, what is my program reach? How do I know if people are, how many people did you reach last year, Chris? I mean, tell us. Well, this stuff, you can tell it's the same as going into an in-person event and counting the number of people who are sitting in the seats. Okay, there's 60 here tonight. Great, that's wonderful. Now that used to be the case. We had 60 people, but now, I mean, I won't exaggerate, on a good program, you'll have 60 people who are in person. You'll have less people doing Zoom nowadays. A year ago, there were more, but you might have 10 to 15 people on Zoom. But on Facebook Live, you'll have 40, 50, 100, who knows how many people. And that sits there. By the way, the recording on Facebook also stays there, and it keeps ticking views after the fact. And then there's the YouTube, which gets another 20 or 30 hits. And then the podcast, depending on how well established your podcast is, you can get hundreds of listens on there. So the one program that you had for 60 people has suddenly reached 400 people. Now, that's quite an exponential expansion. And so that's, for us, one of a really compelling reason. It's not just about the numbers and just about, wow, look at all of the people we reached. But we know that by reaching more people are learning. We're meeting our goals of our programs. And one way to know that is that more people are listening, more people are watching. And so these tools, which are all off the shelf and easily usable, we're using them right now, are ways in which you can consider the hybrid approach as a means to expand, whatever you're trying to purvey out there, right? Super easy, inexpensive to the point of zero. And we've really benefited from it, but more than the Montana World Affairs Council benefiting from it, that Montanans benefit from this. That's the whole idea, isn't it? It's that citizens of the state, students in our schools, can learn about these things, can understand them better, can engage more, more energetically on issues that really affect them. At least that's what we hope. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I don't see any questions. I'm going to go back to you, Carolyn, and see where you want to go from here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I'm very familiar with your organization, and it's just great to hear from you directly. I think one of your colleagues presented at our state Montana International Educators Conference last year, which I got to organize,
Right.
which resonates with me with what you were saying, because it used to be our attendance was maybe 12 people, really just because geographically we're so spread out, and then it jumps up to, 40, 50 people,
Yeah.
Which for us is large. There's not many higher ed institutions here.
Right on.
Yeah, so thanks so much for sharing all of this, and and for taking the time to make this recording with me, and I hope that we can be in touch soon.
Absolutely. So Carolyn, let me just thank you and all your colleagues at the Global Engagement Office. This is going to be a great week. I mean, I saw the schedule, and I know that people are going to be watching all kinds of great stuff. And so I wish you well on that. I thank the University of Montana once again for all your help and support in the work that we do. And I may see you on a few other webcasts throughout the week. So thanks, Carolyn, and thanks everybody for watching.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.